Thank you so much, and thanks to the organisers for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. And of course, given the background of the attack on the foreign aid workers, six foreign aid workers, one Palestinian, there's a particular urgency, I think, about what I have to say. Let me begin with an apology, and that apology is for the fact that the UK government, my own government, is changing its approach, perhaps, if not yet its policy, frankly, because three former British veterans who were in the World Central Kitchen convoy were killed. They're not changing their policy because 32,000 Palestinians, including 70% of which are women and children, were killed. So let me begin with the understanding that I make no apology for what I'm about to say. However, I would like to describe what happened. For those who aren't entirely familiar with what took place, and again, I say this against a background of having worked in UNRWA during previous attacks. Now, what happens to aid workers is that they notify or coordinate with the Israeli army, the routes of all aid convoys. They coordinate the precise GPS coordinates, i.e. they give the precise GPS coordinates of every single installation. So the Israeli army has the precise GPS coordinates of every single UNRWA school, every warehouse, every food distribution center, every primary health clinic. And so it was with the World Central Kitchen. The maritime route from Cyprus was coordinated, indeed negotiated with the Israeli army. The place where they landed was coordinated. The Israelis were told the exact every millimeter of the route that the convoy went along. And on the day of the actual killings, the three vehicles, number plates, were all notified. The route and the time of the journey notified. The people, their identities, their passport numbers, all notified to the Israeli army, clearly marked with brightly coloured logos on all of the roofs of the cars. The first car was struck, and some people were killed. And immediately, those who were killed were evacuated to the second car in the three-car convoy. And the Israelis were phoned and they were told, "You've just hit one of our cars. We're continuing with the other two." They then hit the second car, at which point all of the wounded and whoever they could evacuate from the second car went to the third car, and then the third car was hit. So the Israelis knew exactly what they were doing. This idea that it was an accident is very strange, considering the accident happened 3 times. Now, the reaction in the UK was quite interesting. The UK media, as you can imagine, loves an army veteran like you can't believe. I think it's a sort of hangover from empire. But essentially, the British press, particularly the right-wing conservative press, went crazy about the story. And we had editorials calling for an arms embargo, the cutting off of military supplies to Israel. We then had an explosive interview given by, I don't like to use the word Tory grandee because I'm not quite sure what it exactly means, but a man called Alan Duncan, who was actually very close to Mrs. Thatcher and is now a very influential member of the Tory party, got up in public on LBC, one of the UK's leading radio stations, and basically outed a number of ministers. And he basically said that the Conservative friends of of the Conservatives, have their tentacles around a number of leading people. He specifically outed Lord Pollock and Lord Pickles, who are two members of the House of Lords who've been doing Israel's bidding throughout the war. He called on them to be sacked. He then specifically pointed the finger at Suella Braverman, the former British Home Minister, Michael Gove, a leading minister, Robert Jenrick, a whole load of leading Tories, Tom Tugendhat, the security minister, who he quoted as saying does not accept that settlements are illegal. I don't know if that's the case, but essentially it was a revelatory interview, which led to further calls for British military assistance and arms sales to Israel to be suspended. At the same time, you had the lawyers in the Foreign Office admitting that it was their opinion that Israel was violating international humanitarian law. Now, you would have thought that was blatantly obvious. But for the government's own lawyers to come out and say this really was quite a stir and really added a certain urgency to the public discourse within Britain. You then had a debate within the Labour Party, the opposition Labour Party, which is likely to form the next government, which again has been rather divided and divisive. So David Lammy, who's slated to be the next Foreign Secretary, he's the shadow Foreign Secretary at the moment, he, like a lot of the Labour Party, are very mindful of the fact that support for Palestinians might make it more difficult for you to be elected, which I don't believe to be the case. I think the street in Britain and public opinion has shifted considerably. There are some in the Labour Party, at least, who make the calculation that it might be problematic electorally to support Israel, to support the Palestinians in this particular instance. And actually, Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition, caused consternation at the beginning of the war in giving an interview in which he appeared to support Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister's call for a total blockade. So we now are at a very interesting juncture in British policy, in the formulation of British policy towards Israel. It's very clear from what Chev Andrea has said, the head of World Central Kitchen, that the Israeli investigation, and I think he's absolutely right, is not impartial, it's not independent, and it's certainly not transparent. So what Netanyahu did very quickly was to sack two, at least, and discipline some other army officers who he deemed to be responsible. But the families of the three veterans were very clear that losing your job because you killed one of their family members does not look like justice and accountability. And the British press are all over this. So I don't think that issue is going to go away. And I think that issue symbolizes and bleeds into, forgive the expression, a lot of other issues. The arms embargo, the question of a ceasefire, the question of legality in international law, the question of accountability and justice. And I think what we're going to see now is enormous pressure on the British government. And I think that will be a media campaign, because, as I say, the media are all over this, to hold Rishi Sunak to account, to make sure that he holds Israel to account, and to make sure that there are significant reasons. Forgive me, I have a very noisy dog. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure for a major rethink in terms of all of those various issues. I think I leave it at that. There is perhaps more to say about this, but I think I've pretty much exceeded my 7, whatever it is, minutes. And with that, I'll hand back. So many thanks indeed. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gunness. It would be really interesting to also hear from you, maybe later on, perhaps if you have some time, as to what you see the possibilities for changes in UK policy and how maybe would be good ways to advocate for that.
Yes, I mean, the other, if I may, to interrupt, the other quick thing to say is that, of course, 176 UNRWA workers have been killed, and there is no talk about an investigation, accountability. I know from talking to colleagues in UNRWA that every single death is being investigated. And I think it's inconceivable for us to think of a British position which says that we want to see accountability and independent investigation for our own nationals, but not for those who work for an agency which, actually, until fairly recently, we funded as a very proud, I think Britain was the 10th largest donor, though that's, again, reduced quite significantly in the last few years. In 2018, Britain gave to UNRWA £68 million, I think I'm right in saying it's pounds, and that was reduced to 23 million last year, so an 80% reduction in British aid. Nonetheless, one would hope that given Britain's historic support for UNRWA, and also given its historic responsibilities as a former colonial power, one would like to think that Britain would not abandon UNRWA and would push for accountability for all the UNRWA workers that were killed. Sorry, I just thought I should say that.